Welcome everyone to the Ignatian Inquiry webinar series. I'm Carol Kelly, Client Services Liaison at the Irupe Virtual Learning Institute. All of us at AVLI are proud to be partnering with the Jesuit School Network, and it's our honor to provide the platform virtually for their Ignatian Inquiry series. So we're recording now, and welcome to everyone to the series, the Ignatian Inquiry Virtual Series. And let me share my screen again, and I'll give you an idea of what the agenda is going to be like and what to expect today. As always at the Irupe Virtual Learning Institute, we like to start with a prayer. So if you'll join me, I will read the prayer, and we can center ourselves and be thinking about the future of this discussion. So, O light of God, anointed by your morning light, I lift my spirit to receive the gift of this new day. Open my eyes to the beauty that surrounds me, that I may walk through this day with the kind of awareness that calls forth grateful living. In all of creation, let me see the brightness of your face. Shine in my heart and on my life, filling me with joy, creativity, hope, and laughter. Draw me into the radiant glory of your presence and into the small lights of those with whom I live and work. Inspire me to take time for those who are discouraged. May I live with the kind of presence that enables others to feel at home. Great Dawn of God, hear my prayer. Okay, so first thing we want to do is get started with our wonderful hosts, and that's how we'll get started. We've already obviously had the welcome and the prayer. So first introduction, I'm just going to turn it over now to Kristen Culley, and Dr. Kristen Culley, who is the Director of Research, Development, and New Ventures for the Jesuit Schools Network. So Kristen, without further ado, I'm going to turn things over to you. I'm going to stop my screen share, and you can have the floor.
Thanks so much, Carol. And a special thanks to our hosts at AVLA, Carol Kelly, and to Jeff Hausman as well. We're really grateful for their partnership in our work. And of course, many thanks to our presenter, Jen Lemaster, who I will introduce in just a second. On behalf of the Jesuit Schools Network, welcome to our latest Ignatian Inquiry virtual session, a component of our research development platform. And we hope that this finds everyone healthy and safe at home in these crazy days. At the JSN, we're eager to encourage a spirit of inquiry across the many layers of our work in Jesuit education. And we envision our particular brand of Ignatian inquiry to be the art of inquiry as seen through our Ignatian lens, asking questions and exploring issues that matter in our schools through the frame of our shared Jesuit mission. Many of you are familiar with the various events and programs supported by the JSN, where we have an opportunity to connect across schools with fellow educators. Programs like our seminars in Ignatian leadership, our many cohort gatherings, and the colloquium that's held every 3 years. Those opportunities to connect in person provide exceptional means to branch out of our own worlds, our classrooms, our offices and halls, to learn about the work in other schools and the programs that are going on across the network. The idea of these Ignatian Inquiry virtual sessions is that we will carve out space to connect virtually in the time in between our many in-person gatherings. We seek to encourage Ignatian Inquiry sessions more than just every 3 summers at the colloquium. And now, of course, with our current reality in this pandemic, everyone is utilizing the virtual space to connect. With the support of AVLI, we are able to meet virtually in this space to share and to talk and to learn about the good work that is going on across our schools in North America. It's amazing to think that in the year since we developed these virtual inquiry sessions, all of our schools have gone virtual, hopefully just temporary. So this is an even more timely format than we could have anticipated last year when we got started. In this webinar, we will learn from Jen Lemaster, Assistant Principal at Brebeuf Jesuit Preparatory School, about the potential of culturally responsive teaching techniques, or CRTT, to improve instructional delivery in Jesuit schools. Jen developed this session after sharing her master's in educational leadership thesis with Jesuit school colleagues. To set the context of CRTT, she will briefly share her research examining the pre-assessment, specific techniques, and impact of culturally responsive teaching techniques on instructional delivery with faculty at Brebeuf. Next, she will look at how they moved the academic study to a PLC experience in the 2019-2020 school year with a second group of faculty. Jen will lead us through an experience of some of the intervention skills in small groups to practice the techniques. And finally, she will reflect on how CRTT may be useful in your school community. So we thank her very much for taking the time to share her learning with us here today. I'll turn it over to Jen now to more fully introduce herself and share her learning.
And she unmutes her mic. Well, thank you very much, and welcome all. As strange as it sounds, we started planning this in the fall when life was a little bit different, and then we find ourselves in this format, but it's still just as critical today as it was back in December or what have you when we started doing this. So let me call up some fun slides. These I will make sure are available to you. Because there's a lot of links and some things in here that you can use. So like everyone mentioned, this was part of a master's thesis for me. I am not a world famous researcher, but I thought I'd give it a whirl and do a quantitative study. I'm going to briefly run through that. It's a little dry. If you would like to reach out to me at any time to read that document, by all means, it's a PDF and it's 69 pages of thrill. But my email is here. I'm also on Twitter, so you're welcome to reach out to me. So basically, what is culturally responsive teaching techniques? It's a mouthful, so I tend to use the term CRTT. Culturally responsive teaching, a lot of you in this room I know have done studies like this and probably could also be presenting this. But it was started with Geneva Gay, researcher, back in the probably late 80s, early 90s, who started looking at how can teachers use cultural characteristics, experiences, and perspectives of our student diversity to help them learn better in schools. Now, this has been going on for a long time. Geneva Gay, I would say, re-sparked interest. So some of you have read some of the research that came out of the 60s and 70s on this, when suddenly we realized as educators that children do not learn in a bubble of school, but they come to school with a lot of backgrounds and experiences. Let's keep going here. So back to our friend Geneva Gay, she looked at 5 essential elements for us in teaching. So, and a lot of this deals with us as leaders in schools and educators in developing a knowledge base for diversity, cultural diversity. What does it mean? Who are our students? This is where we start intersecting really quite nicely with Jesuit education and Catholic education as a whole. Creating a curriculum. So we're looking at a knowledge base, a curriculum, a caring learning community, communicating with diverse students, and delivery of instruction. So I found this wonderful book. This is a newer book. The link is at the end, from 2016, where a woman named Zaretta Hammond took the work of Geneva Gay and these 5 elements and said, hey, we also have this brain-based learning thing that's going on in current education, and I bet we could combine the 2 together. And that is exactly what she did. All right, so here's our intersection. So we have culturally responsive teaching techniques in Jesuit education. I know some of you in this room are not Jesuit educators per se, but it also crosses over to, I'd say, all Catholic education. CRTT is very much a whole student approach. We're looking at the intellectual, cultural background, and physical self of the child in the same way that in our educational settings, we're looking at mind, body, spirit. Both settings really want to take a look at active learning to develop independent learners. In Jesuit education, we would talk a lot about active learning to engage the imagination, the senses, that affective experience with the content. But it's ultimately the student. We talk a lot about we can offer things, but what does the student decide to take? And it's that independent learner. CRTT is going to talk a lot about growth mindset, and we are going to talk a lot about discovering and cultivating our God-given talents. And in elements of actual classroom practices, in Jesuit education, those of you, you know this, context, who is our student, where are we in the curriculum? We give them some experience where they're actually doing and making and really chewing up things, reflecting the time I call the Tetris falling time and bringing it into use. This would be the same goals, ultimate goals of CRTT. So I'm going to blow through these really quickly. So I did a study. We used this particular book. They did pre-survey and post-survey use of these particular tools. And if you can see, for the most part, some of the interesting things for me was there were needles moved. People either learned those core elements, they developed that knowledge of cultural differences and cultural identity in the classroom, or they tried new strategies to deliver the content. And so it seemed worthwhile to expand. As far as my research went, we could not find, or I could not with my advisors find any research where anybody had actually looked at CRTT in private schools. There's been quite a bit of research and study done in public schools. And I think part of that just comes across as people assuming that we have homogeneous populations in our private schools, which you and I know is not true. And so finding this way that even with the briefest of intervention activities in reading, dialogue, practice, giving teachers that time to have some growth in instructional practices really built a more positive interaction, which is what that says too. So the applications that we ended up doing is we wanted to look at some strategies that were most significant in improving instructional practices. We are measuring that currently by some great distribution data and gap analysis that I'm working on with our CIO in our school. And we also wanted to do more broadly some professional development in this process. So this is what we ended up with our key sort of breakaways. We decided this year that we would do PLC groupings with all of the faculty and staff. They didn't have a choice. They had a choice in materials that they wanted to work with, but they did not have a they were voluntold to take part in some sort of PLC work on these areas. And the biggest thing we wanted to work with, as our population is intentionally diversifying, how do we build these authentic relationships with all of the students in our rooms? How do we use some brain memory systems for deeper learning? I am shocked when I read brain-based research just how much St. Ignatius sort of was way ahead of his time on understanding the cognitive cycle of learning and realizing that you needed to come from a place of shared common experience and understanding, have actual experiences with it, and time for reflection. We wanted to work with our students' stress responses. We, like possibly many of you, have done a lot of survey work with our students, and our stress responses, even before the past month and a half, 6 weeks, were higher than we wanted them to be. So how can we help students calm the brain? Because we also see from research that an unhappy, upset, under stress brain is not learning. It can't. It's not wired to do so. How we might be able to use ritual resuscitation and repetition better in our classes. Again, this is Jesuit repetition. This is not new. It was just set in a new context for us, which was really helpful for some of our teachers. And then how do we build this creative community of learners, building on these shared values, not what makes us different, but what makes us the same. So some of the areas that we look at in brain-based research is how we input things, how we give the brain time to elaborate on things, and how we apply then those things moving forward. So if you think about input, this is that moment when your brain decides to pay attention to something. I think probably one of the most famous examples of input, if you've seen it on the interwebs, is something's happening in the foreground, and I believe a person in a gorilla suit goes running through the background and does something, and most people don't even see the person in the gorilla suit because the brain was not prepared to pay attention to that. It was prepared to pay attention to something else. So how do we cue our students' brains, cue our students that now is the time that we're in school? And I would say this is even more critical right now in our online environments, and something we're talking about a lot, because all of the traditional cues of I walk into the room and I sit down in the chair and I'm looking at a desk and there's Mrs. Lemaster and she's standing up there with her doofy smile, you know, all those cues are gone. So how do we create those cues? Elaboration, when the brain decides it's ready to pay attention, what takes it to that next step to make it wonder, make it really engage with things? And this is where we can learn some new things for the educational processes that we do, because many of you know our brains can focus. I will say the average middle school, high school student, their brains can focus for about 12 minutes. I do a lot of professional development. I teach my own class. I would say adults also have about 12 minutes, 15 on a good day. Right now, in this current crisis, I would knock that down to 8 to 10 minutes. And after that time where it can elaborate, it shuts down. Regardless of what we're doing, what we want, our brain, it cycles on, cycles off. So it's going to cycle off for about 5 to 10 minutes. So how can we structure our teaching and structure our classes such that we are giving some content, and then there's some time, St. Ignatius would say, to reflect and think about it and process it. CRTT would say, how do we give them time to chew on that information and let it sink in? Then moving to an application stage where the brain actually wants to try and apply it moving forward. So brain research and CRT research shows us we have about 24 to 48 hours to build some deep neuro pathways. And if we don't, it's gone. So any of us who have taken a quick exam that we crammed for, no, it did not sink in, because I decided I'm just going to cram it in there and I'm going to let it go. But again, this is going back to that transition in Jesuit education of reflection into use. How do we help students pull across the finish line? So this is all in the survey or in the slides, which we'll share out with you. So what we did in practice, we had a gentleman named Paul Gorski come talk to all faculty and staff even from the Equity Literacy Institute. He came twice. He came once in the fall to set up this idea of what does culturally responsive teaching look like. Refreshed us on our Geneva Gay and really set the context for why we're doing this. He came back again in January after we've done some PLC work and took us sort of to the next level. PLCs either worked on this Zaretta Hammond book. We also used a book integrating mindfulness into anti-oppression pedagogy, case studies, differentiated instruction, NeuroTeach for the hardcore brain folks, and reading for understanding. Because this is the level that we are always trying to talk about in our school. We hear culturally responsive teaching techniques and we think that is somehow just racial or socioeconomic. But these are all of our students. These are our students with learning differences. These are our super high flyers whose brains work in completely different ways than mine. These are students who English is not their first language. These are, for us, we're 50% Catholic and we're 50% not Catholic. So that is our Muslim students and our Jewish students and our mainline Protestant students, our non-believers, our questioners. All of these pulling into this sense of, whoops, wow, I'm just flying all over the place. Pulling into this idea of who our students are, what is their context, because a safe brain is a happy brain and a safe brain learns quite a bit. So I'm trying to be very cognizant of some time. One of the things CRT, a hardcore little trick to do is we have been sitting here for roughly 24 minutes. We have had a few interesting little brain breaks along the way. But this is a brain break from a cognitive scientist, and you can decide if you want to try this or not. But we've been focusing on this So you can stand or remain seated, give it a whirl. I won't look at the screens if you don't make fun of me. Move your right foot in a clockwise circle and simultaneously take your right finger and write the number 6 in the air. All you're doing here is breaking your brain and you're moving.
Yeah.
Movement's a big thing. It's hard to do. And then it says switch to your other foot and try to do the number 9. Well, that's just all over the map for me.
Clockwise.
So, these are the little things that CRTT would say to pull into your classroom every 12 or so minutes to kind of refocus the brain, get it moving in a different direction, give it a break, and moving forward. It's kind of fun. You can try it. So one of the favorite things that I do with these groups that you have probably seen places is an exercise called Get Out of My Face. And this doesn't work so well virtually, but it's where you stand and you try, 2 people stand in a pair and they try to figure out where is the comfort zone in their space. And it's always really interesting to do this with a group of faculty. When we did it in our PLC group, we realized that some of our teachers were much more comfortable with proximity than others. And some were basically running out of the room. And it really was a good way to conceptualize. We have, say, 25 students in a room. Some of them are very comfortable with us being in proximity, and some of them are not. And some of them, that immediately puts their brain into a flight sequence. Others crave it. So it's not that you have to serve every individual at some micro level. It's being aware of it. Being aware of all the things they're bringing in. So when we talk about igniting, which is on the screen, you've seen various sort of what's under the surface kind of things. This is all the stuff that kids are pulling into the room in their moment of learning. So what cues can we set up? What activities, what routines can we set up when we go into a classroom to say, I know all this is going, I respect all of this, maybe pull some of it in, but to say, let's get our brains on track. So I see teachers do this a lot where they'll say, hey, up on this iceberg, oh, there was a big game in the school last night. Some teachers use music. You might see videos where you see teachers doing handshakes and high fives and all of that for the kids walking into the rooms. Those are ignite practices. And there are a jillion of them. You can put provocative quotes. Most of our schools, I would imagine, we start with prayer. And that prayer is that moment. And especially if you can link that prayer to what's going on in the classroom. We have a social studies teacher he does US history, and he likes to find original prayers from the time period they're studying so that students can be in that time and that place, even in that first 3 minutes of prayer in class. So how do we get them thinking right then in that moment? And again, that's, I would say, hyper important now that we are online. Because boy, are we fighting a lot of things to get the brain coming in and focusing. Chunking and chewing is also a big concept in the CRTT work with the brain. This is the idea that you're giving the brain bite-sized bits of information and giving it time to chew on it. This is straight up Ignatian pedagogy. We're giving you experiences and we're giving you time to reflect on it. But remember, again, I keep wanting to come back to this, our brains will function for about, on a good day, 12 to 15 minutes. We are not in a good time period, so we're looking at 8 if we're lucky. I can't see all your faces to see how you're holding up. So then as our brains cycle down into that 5 to 10 minute downtime, what activities can we do to help them chew on it? How do we help people process? These are just some examples of them. How do you make something? So I've been talking about data sequencing. Okay, now you're going to have some time to work with that. Yes, you're still in that active experience, but you're engaging it. You're at a different time. You can sit and look at the screen. You can think. You can look at some photographs. You could do a little do now. We have people who do chalk talks where if we were doing this in real life at this point, I would say, okay, everybody get out your sticky notes, because I love a good sticky note. And there would be pages on the wall. What have you heard? How are you feeling? what might you take forward? You know, it's that chewing that process to give you some time. And then review, again, straight up Ignatian pedagogy, again, that's repetition, repetition. So how can I do a different iteration of what I've just, my brain has gotten the attention, it's been ignited. My brain thought, oh, this is kind of cool. I want to learn a little bit more about this, but now I want to dig into deeper neural pathways and really build it in. So how do I review it? Some things that are brought up is making non-linguistic representations of things. You've got drawers, great. You've been studying the French Revolution. Draw a picture of what you think the crowd would look like, or draw a picture of the situation. Another review I actually saw one of the teachers from the original study did this week is they were studying the French Revolution. They took notes, and then his review process was, okay, now the notes were in chronological order. Now mix your notes up and put them in some sort of other organizational pattern. To which my 15-year-old son in the class went, oh, what do you mean? So we talked a lot about, well, how else can you pattern this information? Oh, well, I could pattern it this group versus this group. Yeah, you could. Or I could pattern it this place versus this place. You could. Or this law, these laws, and group them together. And suddenly he was taking his content in a whole other realm to figure out how it fits in the larger picture. Some of you may use essential questions. This would be a good time to build it back. So believe it or not, while it sounds like it's all straight up pedagogical techniques, it's still culturally responsive pedagogical techniques, because we know our students, so we understand and we have a connection and a powerful relationship with them. We are giving them some choice or different ways to engage. So I can say with non-linguistic representation, there are students who hate that and will not choose that because they cannot draw a stick figure. And we have other students who this is their moment to shine, and they will draw a work of art that just takes your breath away. But it's helping them process and explain the content in their own way and in their own lenses. So this was our game plan with today. We have been, it is 4:32, and I wanted to give you all some time because I have talked plenty enough in my research to say that you're going to start zoning out a little bit. So we're going to shift it just a bit and put you into some small groups. What I would ask you to do in the small group is do a quick introduction, who you are, just very quickly. One thing that you have heard so far, other than the cross-reference call that had nothing to do with this meeting, but maybe you would. One thing that you can integrate possibly today, or one thing that you want to know more about and how you might go forward to expand those practices.
Thanks for the heads up, Carol. That was fun.
Welcome back, everyone. Jen still has the floor, but welcome back. I hope you enjoyed that process, that it worked out well. So Jen, at your pleasure, pick back up the threads, and perhaps the people who self-volunteered or will self-volunteer to share what went on in the breakout rooms can do that. And Jen, why don't I just turn it over to you? And if anyone has any questions, please do type them into the chat room, and I'll go ahead and field those. We have about 10 minutes for discussion now, and then any questions and answers. So if you have a question that you want to pose while someone is speaking, just type it in, and I'll do my best to moderate it so that the conversation can move along smoothly.
Yeah. So one thing we learned coming back from small groups is that everybody's got a live mic again. So take a look at your mic. And then can I just ask for a volunteer from group one if you want to tell us maybe 3 key terms that came up, if you even paid attention to what you were in?
I'm going to start before Jessica because I said that they wouldn't call in group one first. And of course, that's where they started. So sorry, Jess.
Okay, I'll do my best. So we most of our conversation was kind of on two levels. Like we were talking about what we would do in school, and then more pressingly how we're managing things here. And we talked about how it's more important than ever to chunk and to shrink things down. We also talked about the tensions between those who are teaching like synchronously and those who are teaching asynchronously, and how do you build these things in, especially when you mentioned like you could see people's faces and how weird that was, and we experienced the same thing. We like the phrase the community of collaboration. We thought that was something which seemed important and a good thing to want to do.
Thank you.
Anyone else want to jump in?
All right, group 2. The bar has been set. Okay.
Yeah. We talked about what the news about attention span lengths, especially in trying times, means for one, our block scheduling just in our normal school hours, but then also for online learning. So in a way, online learning can be chunked well, but the ability to reflect with them is sort of stilted. And then with block learning, like 85-minute classes are really tough. We can break them up, although, you know, especially for AP teachers, getting enough in is really difficult. And then how do we build in breaks that don't take their focus away? So if they're just on their phones, then when they come back, they're still distracted and we can't get right back to learning, or that reflection period wasn't helpful. And so we were just sort of sorting through what that means for our school, both now and in more normal times.
Thank you, Maria. That is very true. We're living on both sides of the spectrum, and most of us will probably end up somewhere in the middle, flexing back and forth, and that's a challenge. Yeah. Group 3.
I think that's us. So our conversation we had 3 of 5 in the group are religion teachers. And so kind of talking about the notion of homogeneous classrooms. So 2 of the 5 of us teach in predominantly Latinx classrooms, but in the notion of how do we respond to the implicit way in which focusing on the majority, and that could exist within terms of responding to diverse learners or the variety of different ways that we encounter diversity in the classroom. So the challenge of representing and including the minority students that are in the classroom. But then the other notion of what happens when the content is dominated by Eurocentric mindsets, and how do you create or challenge curricula that doesn't necessarily represent our students' reality or our students' experience. And then lastly, the benefit of, you know, online learning. One of the group members is kind of online teaching across the nation, really. And so the way in which different cultural representations already exist within that kind of environment. So thinking about the broad cross-section of what distance learning can create.
I love that. Thank you, Marcus, for bringing up our Eurocentric curriculum issues. That the relationship is one piece of this, but that is a huge part of our instructional delivery. And then that will also impact activities and processes. And like you said, a student who is not of that background who walks in, odds are the first, you know, it's those microaggressions, they're just gonna shut it down because that's not their experience. So how do we ask really hard questions about that and really knowing? All right, group 4, that was my group. So somebody else. Where's Chris?
I'm right here. There you go. So there were kind of 2 big topics that kind of came on up. The first was, so we had Loyola Academy and Regis represented in there, and kind of the size of our schools. and kind of in making DEI a priority and really making the connection for our faculty and staff to see the thread line between really good pedagogy, how that relates to Ignatian pedagogy, and then how that overlays with good DEI practices. The second thing was, with remote learning, unfortunately being a prospect for the future, how do we create authentic relationships and spending the time to get to know our students, how that may force us to rethink about how we deliver content, and really taking more time to focus on developing good authentic relationships. One of the things that I had mentioned that I'm trying to get across to our faculty is, the importance of keeping a log of, as they get to know their students, to be logging down some different information about them, like, how many people are at their house, what are the things that they enjoy, what are, their favorite Netflix shows that they're watching, things like that, so that they can have those authentic things to go back to, and use this as an opportunity to see a different side of their student, their home life rather than their in-school life. So those were some of the big topics that we talked about, and it was great. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, I like Jim brought up, we say context a lot, but we really got to spend some time with that, and not just throw it out the window. And I love that journal idea, totally stealing that. Group 5.
Jen, that was us. Group 5, certainly jump in if I leave something out. So we spent a lot of time talking about in the beginning that idea of like making the connection, sort of what we heard, and how the relationship piece is so important. That one of the things that the distance learning has put into stark relief was, like, you could see the teachers who the kids connected with, the teachers that were doing a good job at being culturally responsive with all different kinds of kids. They weren't having any trouble getting their kids to show up to the synchronous learning sessions, right? They're getting full attendance, all the kids were being there because they knew those teachers would see, like, they were already seen and known in the real world. So they really wanted to see that teacher, and they wanted to see their classmates in that virtual world. The teachers that had trouble connecting, they're also having attendance issues in those classes. I think Barbara talked a lot about the building that relationship piece. Oh no, that was Nick. Barbara, I think, said something really insightful that I'm going to share with my principal. It's the idea that the teachers have to give students time to grieve, right? That for all of the things that aren't what they were supposed to be. Yeah, and so we spent a little bit of time sort of talking about the different cultural needs of the students, not just along race or socioeconomic lines, but in what's happening to them now. Like, what's happening to the freshmen is different than what's happening to the seniors. There needs to be sort of a cultural responsive response to that. And then Nick, I think, mentioned, and I think this is an important piece too, like, what kind of kid in what family situation is distance learning great for? Some kids it's great for, and depending on the situation in the home, some kids it's just not. And not all of our schools are doing a good job of managing that. We spent a little bit of time talking about, like, things we want to get more information about. Is kind of a little about this, like, managing unconscious bias, approaching situations where you're looking for the reasons why, even though it's not what you expected, why it's good or positive, or why you might hire that person, instead of starting with, like, no. Like when a kid turns in a paper and you're just like, I can see right away it's not an MLA format, I'm not even reading this, right? That communicates a whole lot more than saying, let me look at this and celebrate the good ideas in here and give you those positives, keep you connected, get the rest of it fixed. And I think that is practical advice for a lot more than just writing. Melissa spent some time talking about this idea of what inclusion looks like and how we have to kind of expand our idea of what that means. And I thought that was really good. Nick also spoke about the power of using the book Tattoos on the Heart to help the kids understand the expanding their circle of compassion. I think I covered about all of it.
No, those are all good. And thanks, John. And in a sense, it kind of brings us into the summary thing that there's, for me, a lot of looking through this lens is self-reflective, of asking the kinds of questions that you just asked. And that's part of why I will tote the book again. She has lots of good self-reflections. Because how that looks different in all of our schools. How that looks different in a different classroom. I'm sure you can think of that teacher who, to me, seems really gruff, but the kids just eat it up because they know deep down inside that teacher loves them. And then the other teacher who has a completely different style, but can get that passion ignited. And, looking at one of the things that is in this PowerPoint, I'll share with you again really quickly, is I put a bunch of resources in here, but some things to sort of ignite your brains on these ideas is she has a Ready for Rigor framework. It's just different ways of thinking about curriculum. There's a walkthrough rubric that they've created. That's actually not Zaretta Hammond, that's somebody else. But for me, I actually asked a couple teachers if they would mind me using it. And it's things I didn't even I've been doing this for a while, and I didn't even realize I wasn't looking for it in that way. Like, it was just a whole new kind of lens and a way to have a conversation around it, to sort of help, to coach, to, whatever word you want to use, to work with faculty to really build those relationships. And I'm conscious of time, so.
Yeah, just really quickly, a question was posed about ways to allow students to grieve during this time. And I'm sort of going back and forth in the chat entries here. And Jenny Lynch, would you like to unmute your microphone and just share what you have in terms of ways to let students grieve?
Yes. So with a collection of my freshman team members, and just being really mindful about all of our kids, and there's so many different circumstances happening, and things that we've done or that I've done, taking time to reach out to those kids that are beyond struggling, like the sick family members, the job loss, whatever. Just a phone call. I have a handful of kids I just have a conversation with about once a week, sometimes more, depending on where they're at. We've posted keeping a COVID journal. What does that look like? Because you're in history, and that is a platform to grieve, for writing, for scrapbooking, for painting, drawing, whatever. And we've tied assignments into, our weekly stuff. I'm in English, so this lends itself pretty nicely, where we've given a platform for kids to write about fears, or write about losses, or write just a space to vent and really grieve what's lost. And they take it in a lots of varieties, and there's so many more assignments. I just can't think of them all off the top of my head, but I think it's important just to create a space for them to do that, and letting them know that somebody's reading. And of course, everybody, your own discretion of what works and what doesn't with each kid, but that's kind of what we've done with our freshmen.
I love that. I will say our art teacher, actually, they had to do, because obviously you can't do wheel throwing in a pandemic. Well, we couldn't get the equipment. So they did found objects, and they did art with found objects. And to Jenny's point, they could express some of them. We were really surprised how they expressed their grief visually through the artwork that they created. But yeah, that sense of self-advocacy, self-choice, I like it.
Just want to open the floor if anybody has any last thoughts or last questions. I put my email up there in the chat screen, so if you have further thoughts, please go ahead and send them. I can send questions along to Jen if you have them. Obviously, we'll be sharing all of the resources, but if you have specific ideas that you'd like to share with the group across the network, please go ahead and send them to me. I will be sending out a follow-up message that has the PowerPoint in it, and I'd be happy to share those with the group as well. But Jen, maybe just turn the floor back over to you one more time for any last thoughts that you want to have or closing thoughts. I know we've gone a little bit over because we had a little bit of interesting side conversation at first, but that's not a problem. So Jen, why don't you take over and put closing thoughts on our conversation today?
I would just say thank you for giving up your time and your talents. I love it, especially in this time when our mental capacities aren't quite what they typically are. I am thrilled to hear either in the small group or just in your reporting back how you're seeing the intersections of how this technique, and I always hate to say technique because it's not these pockets of things, and I really just hope that this ignited some ideas for you to see how really culturally responsive teaching techniques, it's totally woven into our Jesuit identity. It's totally woven into our Catholic identity. And it's not an add-on, it's not an extra thing, it's an intentionality. It's using our imagination, which we're called to do, to really discover those wonderful little human beings, and well, they're not so little, those wonderful human beings in front of us and all the potential that they hold. So I hope this ignited something for you other than Zoom cross calls. And I'm really always astounded at the generosity of this network and you people, and thank you so much for that.
Well, on behalf of both teams from the Jesuit School Network and the Arupe Virtual Learning Institute, thank you so much for joining us. And if we don't see you before, stay safe, stay healthy, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you, Jen.
Thank you. It's great to see you all and meet some of you.